Hi class, today we are going to learn about probability. Whenever I think about probability, I always think about a dice, so rolling a dice. We're going to do a lot of problems with that. So probability is just how likely something is going to happen. Many events can be predicted with total certainty. The best way we can say is how likely they are to happen using the idea of probability. So tossing a coin and throwing dice, those are two of the most familiar we are with probability. So when a coin is tossed, there are two outcomes. You can get a heads or you can get a tails. Here's my heads, here are my tails. We say that the probability of tossing a coin is 1/2 or 50%. Okay, so half of the time you'll land on a heads, half the time you'll land on a tails because there's one out of two outcomes. Throwing a dice, well, there are 6 sides to a dice. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Therefore, there are 6 outcomes. So the probability of getting a 1 is 1 out of 6. The probability of getting a 2 is 1 out of 6. So on and so forth. So the probability of getting any one of those specific numbers is 1 out of 6. Probability in general is the number of ways that it can happen divided by the total number of outcomes there are. So examples is the chances of rolling a number 4 on a dice. Well, you can roll a 4 one time, and there are 6 total outcomes. So I could roll a 1, a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So the probability of rolling a 4 is 1 out of 6, 1/6. I can also divide 1 divided by 6, and that's 0.16 repeating. So that means if I multiply that by 100 to get a percent, that's 16.7%. That's the probability. Okay, you can use probability as a fraction, a decimal, or a percent. So the decimal version would be 0.16. And then this is repeating. Okay, well, that wasn't supposed to have an arrow. And another example are there's 5 marbles in a bag. 4 are blue and 1 is red. What's the probability that I would get a blue marble? Well, there are 4 blue marbles, so that's the number of ways that it can happen, 4. But there are a total of 5 outcomes, right? I can have 4 blue or 1 red. So the probability is the number of ways it can happen divided by the total. So 4 divided by 5, that's 4/5. I can write it as a decimal, or you can write it as a percent. 4/5 as a percent is 80%. So these are the 3 ways that you can write probability. Right? An activity involving a chance, such as rolling a cube or flipping a coin, this is called an experiment. Okay, experiment is a special word in probability. It's a repeatable procedure with a set of possible results. So example, throwing dice. We can throw the dice again and again, so it's repeatable. Therefore, that's an experiment. The set of possible results are here. These are called outcomes. So the outcomes, each repetition or observation of an experiment is a trial, and they each have a result. So it's the results of an experiment. So an example is getting a 6. That is one of the outcomes from the experiment. A set of 1 or more outcomes is an event. For example, rolling a 5, which is one outcome, can be an event, or rolling an even number, more than one outcome. That's an event. So 1 or more outcomes of an experiment is called an event. An event can just be one outcome, or it can be more than one outcome. So rolling a 5 or choosing a king from a deck of cards. So any of the 4 kings. That's why it's multiple events. Rolling an even number, multiple events. Okay. Probability is just a guide. It says that what could happen. It's an estimate. So tossing a coin 100 times, how many heads will come up? Well, you have 50% chance of getting a head, so it's about 50%. Now, does that mean that I will get heads 50 times? No, it could be 49, it could be 48, it could be 52. It's just a probability, so it's just what we think is going to happen. Most likely it's going to happen. The probability of an event is written P, and then in parentheses it's event, whatever the event is. So for example, if I want to know the probability of getting heads when I'm tossing a coin, I would write it like this, the probability of getting a head. And then I would write my answer. And that's measured by how likely an event is to occur. So the probability is a measure between 0 and 1 in decimal form. And you can write probability as a fraction, a decimal, or a percent. So if it's 0%, that means it's completely impossible. All the way up to 1, which is 100%, that means it's certain, it will happen. It's unlikely if it's between 0 and 25%. It's as likely as not if it's about 50%. It's likely if it's 75%. Okay? So again, it's just written P of event, so P of heads, if I were to look for the heads. So if we're going to determine whether each event is impossible, unlikely, as likely as not, likely, or certain. Okay? So rolling an odd number on a cube. Well, let's talk about what are odd numbers. So the possible odd numbers that we have. 1 is an odd number. 2 is not. 3 is an odd number. 4 is not. 5 is an odd number. Okay, so these are my odd numbers. All of the possible outcomes of a dice are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are all of my possible outcomes. So I would do 3 divided by the total number of outcomes, which is 6. So 3/6 is my fraction, which I would simplify to 1/2. Okay. And that is 50%. So 1/2 is 50%. So that means if I go back and look at my chart, 50% is as likely as not. That means it's just as likely to roll an odd number as it is to not roll an odd number, which would be an even number. So it's as likely as not. And I can pull out the answer. Okay. All right. Determine whether it's impossible, unlikely, as likely as not, or likely or certain, rolling less than 2. Let's list out all of the possible outcomes. All of the possible outcomes are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are all the possible outcomes I can roll it in a die. Less than 2. Well, that's only 1. The only number that's less than 2 is 1. So there's 1 out of a total of 6 outcomes. And that's fully simplified, 1/6. And to find the percent, I would do 1 divided by 6, and that gives me the decimal form, which is 0.16666 repeating. Okay, and so therefore, you multiply it by 100 to get, you want to multiply this here by 100 to get the percent. And the reason is because, remember, percentages are out of 100, right? 100 is the whole. So you multiply by 100%. So it's 16.7%. Right, well, if I go back to my chart, 16.7, it's not completely impossible, but it's very unlikely because it's under 25%. So we're going to say this is unlikely. It's not impossible that I can roll a number less than 2, but it's unlikely that I would roll a number less than 2. So rolling a number is unlikely. All right, rolling 3 or more on a number cube. Well, first I'm going to list my possible numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are all my possible outcomes. All right, rolling a 3 or more. So 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that is 4 out of a total of 6. That simplifies to 2/3. And to find the percent, I would do 2 divided by 3 times 100, which is about 67%. So that's more than 50%, but it is not, it's less than 100 or less than 75. So rolling a 3 is likely. It is very likely that I'm going to roll 3 or more, but it's not certain. Okay. Rolling 6 or more. Well, there's not anything more than 6. So to roll a 6 or more, I have 1 out of 6 outcomes. And to find the percentage of that, I would do 1 divided by 6 times 100, which is about 17%. Therefore, this is unlikely. It's not impossible, but unlikely. All right, we're going to find the probability of each as a fraction and a percent. So I want to know, what's the probability of rolling a 2 here? Well, there's 1, 2 out of 8, so it's 1 out of 8. Okay, and that's my fraction, but to write it as a percentage, I would do 1 divided by 8 and then times 100, which is 12.5%. Oops, I didn't mean to take that away. Okay, so fraction and then a percent. All right, probability of an even number. Let's see all of my even numbers. I have 2, 4, 6, and 8. So I have 4 even numbers divided by 8 total possible outcomes. There are 8 numbers there, so that means 8 outcomes. So 4 eighths, but I want to simplify that. So 4 eighths is 1/2, and 1/2 is 50%. So the probability of getting an even number is 50%. I want to know the probability of getting a 5 or 6. So 5 or 6, that's 2 possible outcomes that could happen out of 8 total outcomes. And that simplifies to 1/4. 1/4 is 25%. Right, the probability of getting an integer when spinning this. Well, an integer, all of these numbers are integers. So that's 8 out of 8, which is 1. And 1 as a percent is 100%. Okay, so these are just a few examples of writing probability as a fraction or a percent from a spinner. Now let's talk about a bag containing circular chips that are the same size and weight. There's 8 purple in the bag, 4 pink, 8 white, and 2 blue. So let's add these all up because that's important. I need to know the total number of chips in here. So 8 plus 4 plus 8 plus 2, that's 22 chips. Okay, so there's 22 total chips. That's important to know because that's the total number of outcomes that we could have. So I want to know the probability of drawing a pink chip. So we would write that as P, pink chip. So the probability of drawing a pink chip. So there's 4 out of the total, which is 22. So that is 18.8%. 18.18, sorry. So we would just round that to 18.2%. And I also want to simplify this fraction. That's not simplest form. So I can divide both of them by 2, and that's 2/11ths. So 2/11ths would be my simplified fraction, and 18.2% would be my percent. So I could write it either way. Okay. It says, what is the complement? The complement means the opposite. So the complement of drawing a pink chip is not drawing a pink chip. Okay, so if I don't draw a pink chip, that means I could draw a purple chip, which is 8, plus 8 white, that's 16, and 2 blue, that's 18. So the probability of not getting a pink chip is 18 out of still the total 22. Okay, 18 divided by 22 is 0.818181 repeating. We have to multiply that by 100 to get the probability, and that's 82%. Okay, or the simplified fraction would be 9/11ths. All right, what I'd like for you to do is go ahead back to Schoology and go ahead and complete today's assignment on probability.